Hello, and welcome to the ATARC webinar series. Today, we're going to hear from cybersecurity experts as we explore how to navigate the journey beyond the modern zero trust approach. My name is Tom Suter. I'm the founder and CEO here at ATARC, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's panel. I want to welcome all the attendees. ATARC would love to give special thanks to our Palo Alto Networks team for helping put this webinar together. I think they might have helped us with like the first webinar after pandemic, first or second one. And they've been a great partner with us for a long time. Really happy to work with them. Before we begin, I'd like to encourage the audience to submit questions on their own in the Q&A section of the platform. We're going to be doing them throughout the panel, so please send them in. Also, remember to answer the poll questions as they appear to make sure you get your CPE credit. And the questions today should be a lot of fun. So let's meet our panel of topic experts. Panelists, if you can come on. So I'm going to do some quick intros, and then we're going to get into the discussion. Welcome again, Sean. Good to see you. Sean Connolly, who's the TIC Program Manager and Senior Cybersecurity Architect at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. And he just recently won a Fed 100, so I wanted to embarrass him in front of everybody else. Congratulations again, Sean. We also have Amy Hamilton, who's the Senior Cybersecurity Advisor Policy and Programs at the United States Department of Energy. Welcome, Amy. Good to see you. And we have also Eric Sanders, Chief Information Security Officer at the Office of Intelligence and Analysis at the United States Department of Homeland Security. Good afternoon, Eric. And then we have Paul Caspian, last but not least, Principal Product Marketing Manager at Palo Alto Networks. Welcome all. So maybe Sean, you can kick us off. Once again, congratulations on the Fed 100. I'll be there when you get honored. I guess when do we do that? Like in March? It's coming up. And is it in March? Is it April? I forget.
I think it's beginning of May sometime, I think.
Beginning of May. Okay.
Not that I have a calendar to schedule my workouts to try to lose some pounds before that or anything, but
I need to be on that calendar too. You know, I haven't won any awards, but this pandemic is
yes.
you know what it does. Well, thank you. I look forward to your comments. A lot cooking over there at CISA.
No, thank you, Tom.
Yeah, if you want to go ahead.
Oh, sure. Sorry. So again, my name is Sean Connolly. As Tom mentioned, Cybersecurity, Infrastructure Security Agency. We like security so much we have it twice in our name. I lead a couple of different things at CISA, including the TIC Program Office, which traditionally has been that traditional perimeter castle moat philosophy. But now as we move toward TIC 3 and understanding the distributed architectures, and also more recently on some of the zero trust efforts across the FSEB, CISA at large, and myself and some other colleagues work hand in hand with OMB on the efforts. Go ahead, Tom.
Great. Next, we'll go with Amy.
Thank you so much for having me.
Are you out of your house? Is that an office? It's hard to tell. Sometimes you can tell, sometimes you can't.
This is actually the real office, but my pandemic story is that I came to Department of Energy 2 weeks into the pandemic. So I really didn't have much in my office. Today's the first day I actually started to like put anything up, like photos or anything. So it's been kind of coming in for the past year, like maybe one day a week for a few hours. So trying to make it look like someplace you could actually, invite somebody into. But I work here at the Department of Energy, and my background was policy and programs, and thanks to Executive Order 14028, life has changed pretty significantly in the past year for both myself as well as everybody else in the agencies, and really looking at how do we fundamentally re-architect our networks away from the old moat and perimeter castle sort of design, and how do we really start embracing a zero trust environment. And like most agencies, we are pretty much at the start of this right now, and working across the department or across the interagency is really helping on my department particularly to come up with ways that you can do this quickly, and more importantly, do this cheaply, because as everybody knows, it's been a very fiscally constrained environment for all of us.
Great, thank you, Amy. And next we'll go with Eric.
Yeah, good afternoon.
I'm guessing now, is this your house, or I don't want to presume it's your house or the office now after I messed that last one up.
Well, so this is my house, or at least part of it anyway. We don't have a lot of cameras where I work inside the building, so it makes it a bit of a challenge to do something like this from there. So I'm in the intelligence community part of DHS, the Office of Intelligence Analysis, INA. Like Amy, I kind of changed jobs during the pandemic, so my office actually at DHS is still sparsely decorated, if at all. Prior to coming to DHS in last fall, I was with NGA and spent a lot of time at NRO before that. So most of my career has been in the intelligence community, and then getting to work the kind of blended mission that DHS has, both straddling the IC and Homeland Security and the federal side. So it's I bring a different perspective, I guess, to the conversation when we talk about kind of how the intelligence community handles things like the executive order and the national security memorandum. But like Amy, this is a journey. Like she mentioned, this is not something we're gonna knock out in a year or two. It's something we have to kind of eat a little bit of at a time. So can't wait to talk about it. Thanks.
Great. Well, welcome. And last but not least, we have Paul Caspian. Paul, I'm trying to remember where I met you before. I think it was at either Checkpoint or Aruba. I can't remember, but I know we crossed paths in the past.
Yeah.
And are you out of California?
I am. I'm actually like many companies, Palo Alto Networks has embraced this hybrid work format. We call it flex work, and so I'm working out of my home today in Morro Bay, California.
Great. Well, welcome. I just love to hear your perspectives. I know you see across government, but another cool part of your job is you get to see across a lot of different industries: healthcare, financial.
Yeah. Let me start by saying, great to be in touch with you again. Great to be here today with the other panelists. I'm fortunate to be in a role where I work worldwide on Zero Trust across Palo Alto Networks. And so I get to be exposed to all of our different kind of capabilities across network security and cloud security and such. And we spend a ton of time talking to customers about how they can really make Zero Trust, kind of actionable, and kind of to Amy's point, how do you do it with some of the tools and technologies that you might already have today?
Great. Well, thank you. Well, let's get right into it. There's been a lot of debate about Zero Trust recently. It's become synonymous with cybersecurity, I think. I think a lot of our vendor partners have, really adopted the strategy, and so it's you might as well replace cybersecurity with Zero Trust. How should organizations approach a Zero Trust journey? How do they put that together with their existing assets and some of the things that they might need there? And we'll start off with you, Sean. What have you seen with agencies? Some of as you went through TIC, it's kind of like that now with Zero Trust.
Yeah, Tom, I think to your point, a lot of the Zero Trust efforts are really, truly modernization efforts in general, right? And they're embracing those Zero Trust principles. And when you talk about the principles, assume breach, least privilege, those are common principles we've had for a long time. But I think what's interesting towards Zero Trust, they all work together under that umbrella in a new way. And as you said, also, you're seeing how the vendor community and the community in general is starting to pivot some of their services or the material to sort of articulate toward that Zero Trust architecture that we're talking about. So as you mentioned, we work with the agencies as they are starting on their journeys, just like with CDM, 5-7 years ago. The first place we need to start with is just understanding where the different assets are, where the inventory is. That really hasn't changed since I think it was phase 1 with CDM, understanding what you have now. And I think one of the interesting things about the EO is it's not about, as I think Eric and Amy are talking about, it's not as much about making Zero Trust perfect, or how to get to perfect to Zero Trust. It's that journey, but it's more how can we make meaningful impact now with Zero Trust. And I think that's part of the beauty of the EO. It gives some areas to help agencies now early on toward identity, towards another system, to start moving off on that journey. So I think that's I think the real key to the EO, the way it gives the agents, or not the EO, the memo, I'm sorry, it gives agencies a starting point.
Yeah. It's like you got to drive the car and you're missing a couple of things. You got to build it as you're driving or something. Eric, I know the intelligence community, Zero Trust has been a principle for a long a long time there. Is there anything special in your world that that with zero trust that really affects you?
So I think for a long time we kind of relied on that separation that exists between a lot of the environments we operate within and the internet and things like that, and obviously very strong vetting of the people that have access to them and things like that. We relied a lot on those, and now we've kind of stepped away from that, and we're saying, you got to pretend like you are connected to the internet for the most part. You do have to assume breach and things like that, like Sean said. Kind of looking at things differently than we have in the past. It's a culture change to some degree. Now we'd also like, from a DHS perspective, to take an enterprise approach to solving, zero trust, but taking into account, of course, that not all of your systems and networks and things like that are operating. We're starting from the same place on this journey, right? We're all starting from a slightly different place on it. A lot of networks say that are on the unclassed domain already have multi-factor authentication, things that we've more recently implemented on a lot of our other networks that we do a lot of our work on. So again, starting from different places, but I don't know if we'll ever actually get to this holy land of zero trust, but the good thing about the executive order and the NSM is that it's forcing change. We tend to move in kind of tectonic ways, right? We kind of coast for a while, and then boom, there's a imperative to make a big change, to move out and make a real difference, a substantive difference. I think what makes this different is a lot of times these mandates don't necessarily come with the resources necessary to start to make a difference. And this one's a little different. So happy about that, right? So we're putting a little money behind the mouth, if you will, and being able to move out in that direction. So I'm looking forward to assessing all of our different networks, where we're at today, and plotting out that journey so that we start making meaningful change as quickly as possible, and investing wisely.
And just to follow up, how are you working with the CIO shop at headquarters? How does that all work with the components and headquarters, and how are you harmonizing your efforts?
Yeah, so we have regular meetings that are hosted by the DHS CISO, and all the component CISOs get together and we talk about it. And so there's work being done, there's things being shared. We're all kind of working on this together, trying to find what does a more enterprise approach look like. Can we use enterprise resources for, say, all of our cloud assets, as opposed to rolling our own? You don't want to roll your own if you don't have to, right? You do want to leverage these enterprise resources and realize some economies of scale in that regard. But that said, like I said, not all systems operate in the same context. So the approach will be a little bit different, but it's a risk management process, and deciding where you need to make those investments, where they're going to make the most difference matters. But we're definitely working across the agency to take an enterprise view at the very least, and then see where we can leverage enterprise resources to make zero trust real.
Great, thank you for that, Eric. And Amy, you kind of got the flip version of that. You're at headquarters, and you have all these labs, and they're very, very independent. How do you harmonize from that perspective?
Tom, that's a really great point, and we're really focused on mission-focused, risk-based approach to every single aspect of it. And as you can imagine, it's very, very different when you have a nuclear science laboratory, when you have a facility that's focused on nuclear waste and cleanup, and then you have facilities that are completely focused on open science. And they're constantly coming to us saying zero trust is not working for us because we're working in this open environment. On the other hand, if you go back to 1986 and you look at the cuckoo's egg and you look at what happened there with Berkeley Laboratories, it's still the same environment. It's still the same issues. Adversary comes in through an open science laboratory. They start traversing through networks. They start giving themselves escalated privileges. And, this is how it continues. And if you look at 1986, we really started looking at how do we do basic cybersecurity. A lot of the stuff that we look at now, like basic cyber hygiene with, Patch Tuesdays and things like that. And now we're looking at that next evolution where it has to be that balance between how do we make it secure in a way that users can still get the functions they need. And if we don't allow that, then that's what happens, where people start going around our networks and it's even less secure. So it's, trying to balance all of these things out is sort of what we have to do. And that's where looking at those good initiatives, and we do appreciate a lot of the stuff that CISA has been working with us on the tech program, CDM. A lot of these programs have really helped us to become more mature in these areas. And we're continuing to look to that guidance from the White House and CISA as we move forward, as well as making it so that we have the flexibility that we can go to a laboratory that's on nuclear laboratory and say, you need to focus on what is your risk. And your risk is not going to be the same risk as somebody who's in an open science laboratory. And in recognizing that it's not a one size fits all model.
Great points. Paul, what have you seen in the government organizations around this topic?
Yeah, so as Sean commented, I think May of last year was a pretty epic moment in the evolution of zero trust, and the OMB memo was really critical, I think, in terms of really in a very granular fashion, prescriptive fashion, showing what those different steps are. And as Eric mentioned, a lot of organizations have implemented things like MFA, which are really good first steps. Identity is obviously a great first step for zero trust, and so we're seeing a lot of agencies and also in the private sector, really taking a lot of that guidance and looking at how they can actually implement that. And that's as simple as things of, taking your baseline of MFA and going, okay, how do I, verify the device that user's on? How do I control the access dynamically based on different security telemetry and things like that? Very zero trust types of sort of ideas, right? So I think that we've seen just a much more urgency in general, both in the agencies and also in the private sector around really implementing zero trust in a meaningful way that can be measured, that they can report back to their executive management, to their board, et cetera.
Great. We've got one question. Keep them coming. The question is, do we verify the identity from another source to double check the credentials are trusted? Paul, do you understand that exactly? Or anybody else want to take a shot at that?
I'll take a first shot at that. I think I understand that. Yeah, I mean, you're really describing, MFA in a sense, right? You're talking about doing multi-factor authentication, whether that's a password plus a certificate, or that's a password plus biometrics, or whatever method that you're using. And again, the OMB memo actually outlines in great detail some of the different approaches to do more advanced type of identity approaches. But yeah, the question, it's spot on in the sense that we need to be a lot more thorough about how we actually authenticate users.
Hey, this is Sean. I think Tom, I think one thing also, we recognize we have those different pillars. Identity's certainly a primary pillar going forward. I think one thing, just to make sure everyone's aware, though, we don't, exclusively lean on identity pillar. And you look even back towards SolarWinds last year, and this is all open source, but you look at how the Adversary took advantage of what's called the golden SAML attack. And not to get too technical, but it really was the Adversary taking advantage and compromising the organization's identity stores, and then able to forge fake tokens to mimic a known good user. And so again, going back to, if we only lean on the identity store, I think this is where the question was going, we need to lean on the other pillars: data, device, application, to help augment where we recognize the importance of identity, but can't solely be where we lean on for security.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of going on the next question I had is traditionally identity and access management has been a major focus within zero trust. How should we think about zero trust across the other disciplines? I think, which to your point. Amy, you want to add anything to that?
So one thing I think that's really exciting about M2209 and the direction that we're going with zero trust is the focus on data. And so often, and I would say I am guilty as the next person of this, is, it's like you're focused on the system, the technology, and the stuff that's cool. And then you realize there's users who have needs and they have data, but like that's kind of the afterthought as, technology practitioners. But now really for the first time, that data piece is coming forward. And one of the things that's been very interesting is going back out to the community and really finding from a CIO perspective and a CISO perspective, that has not been something that we focused on. And in our organization, we've recognized that, and our CDO has been moved into our CIO office. And I think that that relationship is really going to change now. And really looking at, data as a pillar, what is the information on these networks? And when you bring up the SolarWinds compromise, and anytime that there's a compromise, it's really having that understanding of what is the data that is on the network or system that's been breached, and then what is that level of security that's needed, what was it rated as a FISMA system, was it low or moderate or high, and what is the impact going to be? And so often we don't have that level of fidelity to understand those impacts right away. And I think part of where we're going to be on this zero trust journey is recognizing it has to be a more holistic approach, and we can't just look at data as an afterthought.
Yeah, Mark Emery, who works with the Emery Group, went to our Zero Trust, had a really good presentation. As a matter of fact, my team, if we can distribute that, and Mark, of course, worked at DHS before. But anyway, let everybody else answer the question too. Eric?
Yeah, so I'll build on what's already been said by the other panelists, and that is, I don't think there isn't one pillar to rule them all necessarily, right? If you rely too heavily on one pillar, which is generally what we've done in the past, right, you end up getting owned. So, for example, you can rely on identity and maybe even encryption. Maybe you're encrypting your data at rest. Maybe you're actually encrypting your data in transport. But if somebody does manage to use legitimate user credentials and get access to it, then your encryption is not going to do you a whole lot of good if you're not adequately protecting that data and limiting access to it through things like ABAC and sufficient governance, right? The right kind of policies and procedures in place. I've seen, unfortunately, situations in the past where that very thing has happened. Somebody, an attacker was able to get credentials and get access to data all the data that user had access to. And one of the big takeaways, from a situation like that is when you're looking over the aftermath and you're like, well, why was that data there, right? Why did you have that data there? The environment wasn't even approved for that data, people just kind of tend to get lazy and about, making sure that the right kinds of permissions are in place. You got to do more than RBAC. It needs to be ABAC, right? And really be more granular, but that also means that, there's tons of legacy data out there, and how do you assign all the appropriate attributes to that in order to secure it properly? So that is also a big lift, I think, for those in the government that have been collecting a lot of data for many years. But so, like the other said, you can't rely on just one pillar. You've got to rely on all of them. But again, you kind of got to tackle this, one technology at a time.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's not a holy war. It's everything matters. And thanks for dropping the Lord of the Rings reference. My team, I drop them all the time. They've never seen it before. So they go, my team, it goes, half the stuff I say goes over their heads. I guess I'm a nerd.
Hey, Tom, I got something on the data side, just lesson learned from our side, kind of like Amy, she was talking about where she came back from. I come back more from a networking background. I supported one of the major network vendors for decades. And when we started going down and we built out that maturity model, and you talk about the different pillars again, when we got to the data one, I think it's the one where collectively in the community, we've been the least mature in a way, and I don't mean that disrespectful, but just like, that's why we kind of build up those other pillars, the device, the application, the identity, just simply because we build those out because it's so hard to wrap our heads around the data. Another way to put this, I was reading an article the other day, it was about a Fortune 100 company, and this is outside, federal enterprise, but it was a Fortune 100 company overseas. And when the GDPR came out, or the General Data Protection Regulation, there's this request in there that a customer can delete their data at any time. And the company is really challenged because the way they'd spread data out and made it so available to the different mission owners, the organization didn't know where that customer data was. And it's really challenged. How do we, and this goes back to inventory, how do we know what to delete if we don't know where that data is in the first place? So it's interesting. And again, if you had a zero trust architecture in place where you understand those type of relationships, they'd be the better place to support it. But it's pervasive question they're all starting to tackle.
Good point. Paul?
Well, just to respond to one thing Sean said, I mean, I think that's been a common thing is we look at data as like the one thing we're really trying to protect. And then there's all these kind of avenues to be exploited around users, around devices, around applications. And so maybe we need to be more diligent on that specific area. But I think, at Palo Alto Networks, we typically, one thing we really kind of hammer home is around, and you've heard that, I think, in this panel, is that Zero Trust needs to be strategic. It needs to be holistic. And I think the system maturity model really demonstrates that in terms of the pillars. When we're talking about where to start, it's fine to talk about identity, or it's fine to talk about, applications, remote access, but really comprehensively, we need to look at it across different areas. And some of those, we mentioned SolarWinds, we talk about advanced attacks. If you really look at, if you do that well, if you could wave a magic wand and do Zero Trust from end to end really, really, really well, you're going to break the attack chain at the device or at the user or at the application or, on the network, et cetera. So, for us, we look at it across identity, device, the access, least access, which Sean mentioned when we kind of opened up. And then that continuous monitoring aspect is really important as well, as just continuously validating all those transactions, throughout sort of the connection life, the connection, that sort of thing. I think that's really critical.
Great. Well, I got pinged. I was forgetting the poll questions. So we have to get these in. It's for your CPE credits. I've said this a few times. I don't want the CPE credit people mad at me. That's people you don't want. So what we were talking about, where are you on your Zero Trust journey? And I know some of you are government, some of you are working with government. So let's take your government customer. And we figured out somehow to make it so the panelists we can vote too. So for a while that was taken away from us magically, but we figured it out. Great. What do we have, Katie? All right. Closer to the beginning than the end, I think, huh? Does that surprise you, Sean? Is it about what you thought?
Yeah, I think, pretty soon here, the agencies need to implement or submit their Zero Trust implementation plans. So I'm looking at those answers compared to what we have known that the agencies to submit. So that 4% there said no plans. That's more concerning one, but maybe those aren't, just agencies that are answering that.
So Sean, you talked about that a little bit. For those of you who don't know, can you talk about when these agency plans, I think Amy got us, I think it's the 27th that they're due.
It's the 27th, so we're going to have ours in tomorrow. But to go back to last year of May 12th, the initial 60-day sprint, we had to have our initial plans in by July 11th. So every agency should have submitted something for the initial plans at least, even if it was just sort of a plan to plan, and that's definitely what our agency did.
Yeah, some agencies got pretty enterprising. They applied for Technology Modernization Fund and got some money. So that was pretty enterprising of them.
Yeah, I think
pretty well.
You see, like with what came out with the Zero Trust strategy there, I think it reflected like what Amy's talking about, those draft implementation plans we saw last year. So I think Krista Rush's team with Eric Mill, they did a great job of distilling the different agency plans out, understanding where the agencies were as a whole, and tactically agency by agency, but then understanding where they need to shift the federal fleet, if you will, forward together. So that's what was reflected in that strategy. To Amy's point, now we got another set of plans due to OMB here pretty quickly. And then again, I think you'll see the same sort of adjudication from OMB, and CISA's in there also, and probably some others, to help adjudicate, understand where the agencies are now, where they need help, where they're planning to focus their efforts on.
Okay. And Eric, like at DHS, do they have one master plan? Does everybody contribute to it? How did that all play out?
So DHS is a little unique in that regard, but I shouldn't say unique. There's probably a couple of other organizations in this boat, but a vast majority of our IT is, very much on the federal side, the FedCIF side. So that reporting structure to OMB, exists for those systems. but our national security systems have a different reporting chain, different timelines for planning and things like that. So we're compiling one holistic NSM or national security system reporting, which is separate and distinct from our regular reporting. But, you know, I'd like to kind of, I think it was Paul mentioned one of my favorite topics, and that's continuous monitoring. I'm a big fan of continuous monitoring, and I think it's like, I think that is probably the single best mitigator against all of the threats exist across our enterprise and lead to faster authorization. And the reason why I say that, I like to bring it up, and, you know, if we have folks from industry on, and I try to use these kinds of events to let them know what it is we need. And what we need is really solid, automated, continuous monitoring that gives us that visualization, that understanding in real time of our risks across the enterprise, so that we know where to apply resources. And we can also eliminate, I think, a lot of the steps to that authorization process that take so long and slow down mission. So sorry, I get off my soapbox, but you mentioned continuous monitoring. I had to throw that in there. So
this webinar supports your soapbox. Don't worry about that. Paul, you want to add anything to this conversation?
No, I mean, obviously, I love Eric's sentiment there. I mean, if you think about, you know, the fact that a user's credentials is eventually probably going to be compromised in some way, you're going to have someone malicious on within your infrastructure, or their device is going to be compromised in some meaningful way. That's really what you have to kind of fall back on, right? And so that's why it's so important to be able to take in different security telemetry and really look at what is that user's behavior, and is it anomalous compared to their baseline behavior? Is that device behaving as it should, and is it expected to behave? And really looking at a lot of the behavior, I would call it behavioral analytics within the environment. And that's really where I think the rubber meets the road in terms of disrupting some of these advanced attacks that we've seen that are very sophisticated, that have gotten past some of the traditional types of checks. And that's why zero trust, I think, is so critical in terms of that, looking for those implicit trust connections and then continuously eliminating them methodically, and then, you know, continuously validating all those transactions. Absolutely. So
great. Well, let's go to the next poll question. And if you can pull that up, Katie. How have you applied zero trust principles to identity? We've got a couple little different things on that one. All right. Everybody get a chance to submit. Usually this audience has pretty quick trigger fingers, so usually we can get something back quickly. What do we have? What do we have, Katie? This one I'm not quite sure. Okay. Interesting. Sean, you see things across government. What's your take on this?
Yeah, for government, it's a little different than other agency or other type of organizations in terms of, I think we have, you know, some already solutions in place, whether it's the CAC card or your PIV card. And I think there's some acceptance on the government side where it may not be on the traditional organization side toward multi-factor. So there's a general acceptance toward it. Where we're seeing some interest is also, you know, the public services, as you start to implement some type of stronger identity solution to public services. Well, some of those services may have had the traditional password type solutions, and those are ones we're trying to have, you know, possibly more of an MFA type solutions. We have to be sensitive to that user base as we introduce a new type of MFA or some other type of hardware or the second factor, that we're not also including unintentional friction, if you will, to that user base. So we do see where those questions are concerned being addressed by different agencies right now.
Great. Any other comments on that? Surprised about what we thought? Okay. Let's go into this, the May executive order and the recent, our recent OMB memo and a couple other memos, one from CISA. Has it accelerated a couple things? I think it's probably accelerated adoption of zero trust. I don't know if that's really a question, but how has it affected your plan? Because I know a lot of agencies have a zero trust roadmap. How has it significantly altered it? I know there's a couple little little things that threw people off. What have you seen, Sean? What's the feedback you've gotten from agencies? Because they pretty much tell you that what they think.
Yeah, I think what the great one in there is that one section about moving an existing system to the internet, being internet accessible only. And when you talk to OMB in the federal CISO shop, really you talk to them, it's more like they just want to have the agency start to understand what does it mean as you pull away from that traditional castle and moat architecture. What are the differences in terms of security? It's not as much as simply just porting your firewall rules to the cloud. How do you have to think about securing that device in new ways? And then also organizationally, what are the different organizations internally to the agency? How does that impact them? What other new stakeholders may be included in that? So that minimal viable product that you're seeing in the memo, I think that's an important one. And like I said before, it's where OMB's having agencies start out slowly, but there are some tangible requests like this to move them forward.
Great. How about you, Eric?
So, I mean, I think what's different this time around is, like I said earlier, I think there's some resources to put against it. Like a lot of other, major pushes in cybersecurity, I think we're going to see some improvement, but I think this time we're going to get more out of it. I think more is going to happen as a result of this particular executive order and fallout from that than previously. And so I'm looking forward to, a more secure operating posture across the government space, raising, all these boats at the same time. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to the journey. And, like I said, I think this time is a little different.
Amy?
One of the things that we haven't talked much about, and it's interesting because I think in Zero Trust, we start gravitating towards the pillars, and then sort of, we talked a little bit about the data pillars, like the one we're not comfortable with. But what we're not comfortable with as technologists a lot of times is those kind of steps underneath the pillar. So when you really start looking at governance, which Eric talked about earlier, I mean, that's really a paradigm change. Like, we're very bad, in my opinion, overall at really looking at the governance piece and the fact that it's part of the model. And then, we've talked a lot about the visibility, the analytics, the automation and orchestration. That's the part I think that a lot of times we are very comfortable with, that sort of, more traditional things. But when you look at governance, when you look at data, those things being brought in is forcing us to relook at how we do things, and is also really bringing in the rest of the organization. And that's one thing that we've had to really start branching out with is, who are the people that we should be talking to in a lot of these cases? They aren't your traditional sort of, cyber and IT players. And fundamentally, a big shift for us in Department of Energy, where we've often been exempted, is the executive order specifically calls out operational technology. And if you're familiar with operational technology, it is old, it is slow, it is legacy, and we just kind of leave it out there for as long as we can so it doesn't break. And the fact that OT has been specifically called out is something that's really causing major paradigm shift across the organization, with people starting to say, wow, we have to start looking at this. When you look at the fact that 10 years ago, we didn't worry that, cyber actors were going to get into the Florida water supply. And then we saw that happen, I think about a year and a half ago now. And these are the things where we're now like very aware that these systems are not impenetrable and we have to secure them as well. And moving towards zero trust in those areas is a fundamental game changer.
Can I build on the governance conversation?
Sure.
Yeah. So,
so
I think, one of the challenges we've had, like in our race to the cloud, right, was because everybody wants to get in the cloud as quickly as possible. And to some degree, we got ahead of policy and we got ahead of governance, and we got ahead of, establishing an appropriate level of expertise in those environments before we moved into them. We understood our on-prem environments pretty well for the most part. Governance there, while it was probably lacking, at least there was something there. Whereas I think for some agencies, going into the cloud was kind of the wild, wild west to some degree. It was just automatically assumed to be better, and to some degree assumed to be more secure, right? But And to some degree, okay, you can argue that, but how easy is it for you to make a configuration misstep that, opens everything up? But, I guess my point is I think, and I gave was the point I made in the previous talk was that, I think like going into the cloud, you've got to make sure you've got the right kind of policy in place. Otherwise, the way you enter cloud is going to be, you're not going to be able to use enterprise solutions to do things like zero trust, because you're not going to have that kind of control over those environments necessarily. So you need to know who in your agency can go into the cloud. You need to know, what controls there are around that, and kind of make sure that you take an enterprise approach to something like that. And just the comment about, or the additional comment about governance, just kind of made me think about that, because it can be a lot harder to do zero trust after the fact, right? And I think we all know that it'll be harder that way. So if you can build it into your cloud adoption and your, where you're going in the future, then obviously it'll be easier to do.
Yeah, I think security after the fact, and whether you do a DevOps or zero trust, it's always much harder. Paul?
Yeah, there's so many great points here. I'd love to respond to. I'm just going to handpick a couple of them, but I think the last point, we see a lot of customers that their sort of digital transformation initiatives lead them to zero trust. And a good example of that is Eric just talked about cloud native and applications. And a lot of the zero trust best practices, really should be applied in that domain just as extensively as when we think about them in the context of users, right? And a good example of that is, we had a customer come to us that had failed an audit on one of their primary cloud production applications because it had an audit very late in the life cycle of creating that application. And so, unfortunately, if they would have gone back, 3 months or 4 months, then they looked at things like protecting workloads and validating workloads and micro-segmentation and all these great best practices that we know we should be doing from a zero trust standpoint. Maybe they could have avoided that. But I just love Eric's comment in the sense of, if we look at it holistically, we don't just think about users, and we think about cloud infrastructure, and we think about unmanaged infrastructure and supply chain and all these other things that are putting us at risk, and we apply zero trust across those domains, we're just going to be so much farther ahead than if we're just thinking about identity, or we're just thinking about remote access and things like that.
Well, let's do a quick poll. Our third poll question. It's a little bit cheeky, but an honest crowd out there. I think we have an honest crowd out there. We're not recording who did what. Everything's anonymized.
If I checked, what is it? Is that bad?
That'd be really bad as a panelist. You might not, despite your Lord of the Rings statement, I don't know if we'd have it back. No, just kidding. Great. Okay, let's see what we have. Let's see what this audience. Okay, there you go. That's why they're here. All right.
Yeah, I think I would go one farther and say I've read it multiple times per day, right? That'd be probably the next one for me. So loud and clear.
Highlighted key sections. Yeah, exactly.
We started making flashcards.
Yeah, you might have me on, Sean. And Sean, I got one question I have one question for you. How does the CISO guidance and how does that harmonize with OMB? What does it have? What is it in that isn't in the other? And I know that you try to harmonize it. How is that looking? Because you're on your second draft.
You're talking about the zero trust maturity model, right? I think that's what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, we can go back a number of years, right, with what's happened in zero trust. You can go back with Steve Hernandez and Dan Jacobs with ACT-IACT and what ACT-IACT came out with. Then NIST, and full disclosure, I'm one of the authors, but NIST came out with their special pub on it a couple of years ago. And then also you've seen a lot of momentum from DOD. DOD has a zero trust reference architecture. I think Air Force is one that builds off that. NSA has some stuff. But where I'm going is I think each one is an iterative, little, I don't say better, but builds off of what was given beforehand. And so the maturity model, honestly, we said this before, that maturity model is drafted very quickly because it's, again, going back to what Amy was talking about. It was to help agencies as they implemented or drafted up their draft implementation plans last summer. So to your point, Tom, we've been working with OMB, we've working with stakeholders to help understand it. And we released a a request for comment for that maturity model in September. And we've been listening to the comments that come back. Again, I think some of that's reflecting what you see in the OMB memo, but we're also understanding like what other areas do we need to help agencies with, just not in the maturity model itself, but there's, a lot of other areas. There isn't like an FSEB version or federal version of a reference architecture. Is that needed? We know some other agencies are working towards like playbooks or some type of way to help agencies build out some different solutions and use cases. So I think we've listened and adjudicated the maturity model itself. Yeah, we are working internally to build out another maturity model, but we may have some other products that we look at to come out more in a faster time frame, just to help agencies. Again, the momentum's so fast on this, it's tough to keep in front of this the way we could have before.
Right. Yeah, I think playbooks are good. Those kinds of activities, we need to probably look at that in our groups. We've got a question. I think it's a good one here. How do you see the application workload pillar aligning with the others in the near to midterm? It seems to be really part and parcel to the visibility step. I'll start off with you, Sean.
So honestly, when I look more at the app workload, it's twofold. So I'm still looking more on the cloud side, the service side itself. So I'm looking to see more infrastructure as code and how we can build out more templates that can help the agencies to build out those application workloads to help the agencies. But there's a number of other areas. I think there's a call out in the memo also for OMB and GSA to work together on some assessments of some of the applications. So there are a number of activities we're starting on toward that.
Yeah, from doing a lot of DevOps and application things, they're really trying to get their arms around it. I think there needs to be some work around that. Eric, you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, I mean, I still, I think it was Sean that was talking about, or maybe it was Amy, I don't remember now, but the, understanding our environment and understanding where we are with respect to all the pillars, including app, I think is, something we still have to kind of wrap our hands around. I think, some of the things are more obvious and we understand them better. I think, we're better positioned to build what we need to into apps that are coming out of our DevSecOps pipelines in our cloud workloads. But, as far as on-prem, which we still have a lot that's on-prem, we're probably going to have a lot that's on-prem for many years to come. I think we got to first understand where we are with respect to that. And like I was talking about earlier about, a risk managed approach, because we're not going to be able to do all of this, certainly not in the short term. So prioritizing those efforts, is going to be the biggest challenge, or the most important challenge.
Great. Amy?
I think that's really important. And then I'm going to tie this back to sort of the rest of the executive order too, where, one of the things that we looked at recently with like Log4j is, we have to have a clear understanding of what we have on our networks and then like what's built in there. And I love that recipe analogy of what the SBOM is going to do. So when you look at applications and where we're at, we have to know not just what applications we have, but then what's built into each one of those applications, so we can start making those smart risk-based decisions when we know that there's a new vulnerability. So it's all really just interrelated, which just kind of goes into, this is a long process.
Great. Paul, you want to add something?
No, I would just say that, yeah, I think, the term visibility came up, right? And one thing we haven't really talked about, we talked about, the importance of operational kind of components of this beyond just tool sets and technology and things like that. But I think one part of it is really just having visibility into the infrastructure of the different users, the devices, the applications that are running, the workloads that are running, all those different things, because even though it's not talked about very much, if you don't really, I kind of call that step zero. If you don't really have that sort of inventory of things, where's your sensitive data at, basic stuff like that, you can't really start going forward with creating least privilege policies. You can't really start putting those controls in place. So when I think visibility, this in the context here was around workloads and maybe applications, but I think about that across the whole infrastructure. If you don't have that, it's really impossible pretty much to do a lot of the different zero trust best practices.
Great. And we have a question. I never credit the actual person, but I am going to this time because they are press. Jason Miller, Fed News Network. He's asking a question: can Eric and Amy offer insights in the role of asset management in their zero trust strategy? How are they ensuring they have an inventory of devices and apps on their network in order to ensure them? Maybe we'll start off with you, Amy.
So that's fundamentally one of the first things that we identified in our zero trust plan that we submitted back to OMB last July was doing our initial assessments. And so that's really kind of where we're starting off is, you can't secure it if you don't know it's there, right? I mean, that's a very fundamental kind of approach that we need to take. And so we've been working across our department to just get the fundamentals right. And then, of course, the next steps after that is looking at the guidance from the NSC on looking at MFA and encryption. But, just understanding that, that's some basic blocking and tackling that we should always have been doing. And then we, of course, have a very strong partnership with the CDM program, and really thankful and grateful for our relationship with CISA on that.
Great. Eric?
Yeah, so for once, I think the intelligence community might have been ahead of the game here. When our previous IC CISO, Sue Dorr, under her tenure, the IC put together this implementation plan. And that implementation plan was to get the entire intelligence community to a better place with respect to cybersecurity. And, like the pillars, the first step in that implementation plan was understanding our environments, right? So having that full authoritative inventory of software and hardware operating in your environments was something we've been working towards now for a while. Again, kind of rolling that up into a real-time visualization platform, right? And making sure that you've got really good authoritative sources of data. And so that, because I'm sorry, but in my head, I'm thinking about all the different things that went into the work that we did and trying to make sure I don't say anything I shouldn't. But, having the right kinds of data, obviously understanding where everything is, what it is. To Amy's point earlier about Log4j, it's one of those things where we'll probably still, 6 months from now, you'd be like, oh, wow, it was in here and I didn't know it was in here, right? So, because we don't necessarily do that very well. But we have been working towards that now for a while in the intelligence community. So I think we're in a much better place in that regard.
Great. We've got a question, and we talked about this a little bit. Where do we get started, and what, I know every agency has to give plans by the end of the year, but Amy, I'll put myself in your shoes. When you got to your agency, how should you get started, and what are the logical steps to getting to this nirvana of zero trust is completely implemented?
I mean, to be honest, it's completely overwhelming. And so you just have to, kind of like do the fundamentals, and like I said, we looked at it first and said, what is the maturity model that we're going to use? It was before the system maturity model. Now we've adopted the system maturity model now that exists. Then we looked at, once we had that, what is our framework? And then to our initial point was like, what are our assessments? What are we doing now? What is our as is? And just going through those phases has been like so much time. And when you look at that alone, it's very overwhelming. And so in the meantime, what you can also do as you're doing your assessments is, what do you have that you can already leverage? And so a lot of times I think people are immediately like, I need more money. And I'm like, okay, but what do you have right now that you could actually do and you can implement? What button can you just turn on that you're not actually using right now? And another part is just really ensuring that you're getting the buy-in across the user community and leadership. And that's one of the things that we've continuously are going back to our leadership about, because they have to understand this. And, as you look across the entire executive order, when we start telling people like, no, you can't do certain things, or the way that we do stuff now is not the way it's going to be done in the future, because moving to a zero trust environment fundamentally changes things like how we VPN in. Like that's a trust environment. How do we move to an untrusted environment? What does it mean for single sign-on? And then how do you do things in a way that's good for the user community? And so all those things have to be in there. And so messaging this across, the leadership early and letting them know the fundamental changes that are going to take place is super, super important in your strategic communication planning.
I think that inertia thing's a big thing. I mean, part of getting started, just get started. Get it started, and then you can start building momentum along the way, right? Great point. Eric?
Hey, Tom, I can offer a quick one. Sorry. One of the common questions we're hearing from agencies internally as they're talking about this is, who owns or who leads the identity mission? We're talking about identity in general. And what I mean by that is a lot of different stakeholders at agencies that have an identity role, the Active Directory team, PKI team, probably the IAM team and the IaaS providers. There's probably some SASE identity solution. And so one of the key things as we talk about with Zero Trust is least privilege. Which council or which group leads the identity mission is one of the ones that's being stimulated by the memo.
Great point. Eric?
Yeah, so I think Sean raised a good point. You know, who does own that mission? And I think, you know, coming to grips with that, you know, as an agency, you know, so you can, or as an enterprise, you know, figure out how you're going to move forward in that regard. Because I think we all know, you know, politics is part of everything we do, and it can be political, especially if they are in different environments and nobody wants to let go of their little, you know, their little environment, their little kingdom, and you know, give that up to somebody else. But I think, you know, maybe to some degree, maybe consolidation in that space makes sense, you know, in different organizations. And you know, I think Amy's point earlier, culture, you know, is gonna play a key role in how successful you are, and whether or not you're able to make the kinds of meaningful changes necessary, maybe not just from a technological perspective, but from an organizational perspective, in order to be truly successful, is, you know, critically important.
I think those, yeah, really good points. I think, like, where would you want to do if you started over again in your organization? Maybe these little different identity groups kind of started because of need a long time ago. What do you need to do now, right? Paul, what have you seen successful with agencies and other, you know, commercial organizations?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that Amy said is getting that executive buy-in is so critical. We've asked a number of different CISOs, you know, what would you do differently if you embarked on Zero Trust again? And they said, I would have gone immediately to executives and explained the magnitude of this, the changes that were coming, why I needed their support, how to get all the groups together working, you know, on the same kind of goals. I think that's absolutely critical. To get back to the question that was entered, where to start, it's really, I think it's kind of the intersection of what are your most critical applications, what are your most entitled users, what is the most risky stuff that you have, and then what is the low-hanging fruit that you can go, you know, grab right away, right? And so, you know, creating that tiered application structure of high risk, medium risk, low risk, creating a most entitled user, medium entitlement, lowest entitlement, and figuring out how can I start putting some Zero Trust controls in place that take care of that most critical 20% maybe. And then, you know, to the points that have been made here, how do I keep ratcheting that up and making incremental progress over time?
Yep. Yeah, that's a good point, Paul. I think what I would do is I'd print out that presidential executive order and say, hey, this isn't me. This is the president saying it's important.
That's also been something that's, I mean, that's really getting back to why was last May such a, you know, an interesting part from a cybersecurity standpoint is it's really unprecedented. And I think it's so clear and it's so urgent at this point. And now it's so, it's been clarified to such a degree with folks like CISA and the OMB memo. It's just, I think we've just made a tremendous amount of progress in the last year on this front. So.
Yep. Okay, we're at the 30-second last thought. I think this has been the fastest moving hour in a while. Sean?
No, I just want to thank you. So, you know, we talked about what it means to agencies. I think one area of discussion is what does it mean for the adversary, right? If we just look at SolarWinds, Orion siloed to DLL, then the low and stealthy, then the domain generation algorithms beaconed out, something was downloaded, then privileges were changed. When shouldn't we have known something that was bad in that? Any one of those steps, we should have triggered something, right? And hopefully, ideally, Zero Trust will help the agencies identify those possible TTPs.
Great, thank you. Amy?
I think all really good points. And I think the thing that we've really seen is, to the point that Paul mentioned, is not just the executive order, but we continuously see things coming. And as long as OMB, CISA, and we get these presidential memorandums like the NSMA even, you know, we continue to get that guidance and direction that this is important. And seeing it every 2 or 3 months, it's definitely showing that this isn't going anywhere.
Thank you. Eric?
Yeah, and to kind of add, so while all of that is very, very true, and we do have, a really compelling, leadership guidance to move it out in a particular direction that, I think we can all embrace. We're still going to be challenged with, we're never going to have all the money we need to do everything. So putting things in context, understanding where your greatest risks exist to I think Sean's point earlier, or actually it was Paul's, I think. But anyway, understanding where your most important stuff is, where your greatest risks are, and having that real-time visualization of and understanding of risk is incredibly important. But prioritizing those investments based on those contextual risk-based decisions is important.
Great. Paul?
Oh, I would just kind of echo some of the sentiment that we've said earlier is that, look at zero trust holistically, figure out something that's doable, that's actionable, that you can accomplish in the next 3 to 6 months, the next year. And then obviously there's a tremendous amount of great public resources out there from some of the ones we've talked about today. From a vendor standpoint, obviously Palo Alto Networks works with customers on, services engagements and planning and how to actually go off and do a lot of this kind of stuff. There's great tools out there, many of which, organizations have in their arsenal today to use. So that would be kind of my closing thoughts, kind of best advice.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for doing this. One little real quick question. We got a question from Jason Miller of all people, and he has it for you, Sean. What's the bus behind you on your shelf?
No, that's TJ. That's Thomas Jefferson. Sorry.
There you go. That's what I thought. Okay, Jason, now we got that mystery resolved. Thank you, Sean, Eric, Amy, and Paul. Really appreciate your time. This is great. We've got a hybrid cloud summit next week. I know we got a lot of people here, a lot of people involved with this. We're working with the DCOI. And also, do you need a CPE credit? Our last poll of the day. That's kind of how we're going to serve you. But anyway, have a great rest of the afternoon, and we'll see you next time.